twisty here. Okay, I've got a Triumph Legend 900. I think it's a 98 or 99 model, and I've just pulled the carbies out and stripped them down and put them back together again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how to tune the carbs and balance them up. What I did is I bought a set of gauges and I made up a little gauge set, one for each carburetor and 3 hoses off one off each one. Okay, now you're probably not going to know where to start, so before you put the carbies back together, what you've got to remember is that the centre carby, or carby number 2, so this goes into the engine, is the master carburetor, and then you've got a screw here, and that adjusts the number 1 carb, and then a screw here which adjusts the number 3 carb. But what you've got to do is make sure that you're not getting any influence of each of the carbs on number 2. So what I do is I've just screwed the screw out on number 1. So screwing it counterclockwise opens the throttle up on number 1. So what I want, and as you can see, the throttle was partially open because it's got the idle already set, which is down on this cable here, which goes up into the carburetor, which adjusts this main linkage here. So what we've got to do is I'm going to actually screw both of these. So to close the throttle, you go clockwise. So we want to open the throttle on number 3 and number 1. So we've got number 2 back into its neutral, unhindered position, so it's not getting any influence on any of the other carbies. So I'm going to screw this counterclockwise, probably about 3 or 4 turns, and you can see that it's opened up quite a bit there. And this one here is a lot closed, and that one there is opened up as well in number 1. So now I'm going to actually unscrew the idle until the centre carby sits against the housing of the actual barrel itself. So it's got no influence at all. So that's closed off completely there. Just give it a bit of a blip on the throttle, and as you can see, number 1 carby is open a little bit, number 2's closed, and I've got number 3 open as well. So I've got no influence on this centre carburetor at all. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw this screw for number 1 clockwise until, looking down on it, clockwise until this carburetor starts to influence the second carburetor. So what I do is I actually hold pressure on both carburetors, on the second carburetor, and as soon as I feel the screw to go tight, I can feel the, I know that it's starting to influence that carburetor, and I'll back it off 1/4 of a turn, and that will give you, within a 1/4 of a turn, to balance that carburetor. So I'm just going to demonstrate. I can't actually do it by hand, with both hands on the one hand on the camera and one hand on the tools. So I'll screw it in, and as you can see, like I'll do it, I'll screw it out about 3 turns, and as I screw it down, you'll see the carburetor closing up on the body, as you can see. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw it in a little bit more until I see the other ones start to open, and back it off a 1/4 of a turn. So that's that carby, that's those 2 carbies, pretty close. And now we can do exactly the same procedure with the 3rd one. So screw it clockwise to close the throttle until you see the second body moves. But I usually hold pressure against the top of the butterfly, so when you open the throttles up, top of the butterfly, hold pressure and then when you screw this one back, as soon as it starts influencing this carburetor, you'll feel the screw pressure get quite tight. So that's my tip for the day. And then you can basically, once you feel it go tight, back it off quarter of a turn, put the carbies back in, and then you can put your vacuum gauges on these three ports, vacuum ports, and balance it finally. So it's you're only going to need a very, very fine amount of tuning from that point onwards. Bear in mind, you do have to have your engine in good condition, so taper clearances must be good, float levels must be good, and clean fuel. Okay, so that hopefully that gives you guys a few tips. This is a choke rail here, and you can give that a bit of a lube up and make sure that it's not sticking. Righto, cool, thanks guys. Okay, carburetors are in, all piped up and hoses and everything back on. So all I've got to do now is I'll put my tank on, but I just sit the tank on and I'll put a piece of 4x2 just here and sit the tank so you can actually adjust the screws, one down there and one on the other side. So I'm going to hook my vacuum gauges up, and I'm going to initially you'll have trouble starting it because the carbies will be empty, but also your idle won't be set, so you're going to have to actually hold the throttle and then balance your idle using the idle screw to get it up at 1000 RPM. Once you've got 1050 RPM. So once you've got it sitting there, then you can start playing with the carbs. Alright. Okay, the third gauge is a little bit too high on vacuum, which means that the throttle was a little bit closed a wee bit too much. So I need to basically open the throttle a fraction just to drop it down the fraction it needs, because it's sitting up a little bit higher on about two notches past 5, and this one's these two here are sitting perfectly on 1 notch past 5 to 5.